you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Good morning, everyone. I think we have a presentation you'll all enjoy. I hate to harp on this, but please, if you haven't filled out one of those questionnaires about presentations or speakers or musical groups or whatever you'd like to hear, do me the favor to do that, because again, this is your club. It's not what I want, it's what you guys want. So if you haven't, please do me the favor of doing that. Our speaker today is a very key component in, I'm sure all of us have taken a flight to a vacation or to see friends or whatever, and you buy your ticket, you get on board that airplane, and you don't really think about what's going on behind the scenes. Probably one of the key ingredients in getting an aircraft full of people from A to B safely is air traffic control. And so our presenter today is going to speak to you about that. It goes back to way back when aviation was first formed. In fact, one of our first towers was right up the road here in Cleveland. And then the evolution of air traffic control as we know it today. 9/11, a little interesting statistic, and James, you could probably back me up on this. Maybe you have a little bit better grasp on the numbers. But when 9/11 happened, air traffic control got over 5,000, think about that for a second, 5,000 aircraft in the air over this country, on the ground in an hour and a half. Is that about right?
It was more like an hour and 10.
Hour 10, so even less. 5,000 airplanes on the ground in a little over an hour. Pretty impressive. Anyway, he's going to speak to you, show you a little bit about what's going on. He's the head of the Air Traffic Control School up in at the Community College of Beaver County, which is one of the only colleges or private air traffic control schools other than the FAA Academy in Oklahoma City that has their own tower up there at Beaver County Airport. So I'm going to turn it over to James Tompkins.
Thank you. Like Mark said, my name is James Tompkins. I'm in charge of the ATC program at CCBC, and we are one of 25 ATC schools in the entire country. So there's only 25 programs in the country if you're looking to get into this field, and we are well known as being the #1 school in the country, and second place really is not even that close. Usually when I speak in front of a bunch of people, they're 16, 17 years old. And most of them have no understanding or idea of what an air traffic controller is or does. Now, everybody knows what a pilot does. That's what you see, but most people, when I describe to them that I'm a controller, they think I'm the one wearing the orange vest, waving the flashlights out on the ramp. And I'd say about 75% of the people I run into think that's what I do. Now, the other 25% who kind of familiar with what a controller does think that all controllers work in a tower, and this is not the case. But if you've ever driven past the Pittsburgh airport, you've seen the very large building in the middle of the airport that's got several controllers up there responsible for the aircraft at the Pittsburgh airport. But less than half of controllers physically work in a tower. Controllers get broken down into two groups, terminal controllers and en route controllers. Terminal controllers physically work at an airport like Pittsburgh. And then the other half gets broken down into what are called en route controllers. They are responsible for aircraft that are much higher, much further away from airports, and they work at what are called centers. And there's only 22 centers in the entire country. The closest one being Cleveland Center. It is actually not in Cleveland. It's located in Oberlin, Ohio. And the airspace they were responsible for goes the whole way from Harrisburg to Chicago. So the aircraft and airspace they are responsible for is very large in comparison to an airport or a terminal controller like at Pittsburgh. But what they do is really the same things, just on a different size level. And my job, a controller's job, is primarily to get pilots, aircraft, passengers from point A to point B as fast as we can without anything bad happening. And that's really my only function, is to get a pilot and an aircraft from point A to point B as fast as they can so they spend as little time and money as possible safely. There's a lot of rules that go along with this, a lot of fancy words we use that don't make a lot of sense. But when it comes to my job, I really don't think it's a job. It is highly entertaining. It is not boring at all. And the number one reason people get into this field, in fact, CCBC's enrollment for our program is 80% out of state. Next semester, I will have somebody from Alaska, California, Texas, Florida, several from the Chicago area, all traveling to Western Pennsylvania to attend our program to be a controller. And the main reason is money. Controllers are very well paid. And when it comes to the progression of the pay, it is very common for our graduates to be making $200,000 a year by the time they're 23 years old. I spoke to a girl yesterday. She just turned 21 and she's going to make $190,000 this year. Now, she went through the program when she was 18. It is only a 2-year program, very sharp, got hired at a very high-end facility. But that's a lot of money for somebody that young. But this is a young person's game. I am 40 years old, and in this field, I am considered a senior citizen. You have to be hired before you turn 31, and you are forced to retire but by the time you turn 56. When you turn 56, you are no longer allowed to work aircraft anymore. Now, this doesn't mean you have to fully retire. You can start working in the training department and things like that. But the thinking behind this is the older you get, your mind starts to slow down a little bit. And in this field, that is not a good idea. Everything controllers do is fast. We think fast, talk fast, spend money fast. We do everything fast. Now, the history of ATC, like Mark said, started probably realistically in late 30s. But they found out when you have a lot of aircraft in a relatively small area, it's not a good idea to just let them have a free-for-all. Something bad's going to happen. So larger airports started getting control towers and things like that. And then in the 50s, there was an accident, and they kind of upgraded the entire ATC system throughout the country. It's going through another upgrade right now. But for the most part, air traffic controller's job has not really changed in the last 40, 45 years. As far as the field size, this is not a very large field. There are under 20,000 controllers in the US, and virtually all of them in some form work for the government. All right? They work for the FAA. We do not work for the airports. We do not work for the airlines. This is considered a public service. And because you work for the government, it comes with all kinds of fun government benefits. You still get a pension. You get benefits for the rest of your life. The medical you get is very good. The retirement program you have is very good. And like I said, there's very few downsides to my job, in my opinion. One of the downsides is shift work. Controllers do not have a normal 9-to-5 schedule. We do not work Monday through Friday. Your entire career, you will be doing some type of shift work. Working midnights, working holidays, and it is really the biggest downside of the job. It is very difficult to have a normal social life, at-home life when you are not Monday through Friday and you're working virtually every holiday early on in your career, but at least you get paid double on the holidays. When it comes to CCBC, we are the only school in the country that has an operating control tower that lets our students train in. And some other schools have simulators to kind of reenact this type of training. Nothing can replace the real thing. Having a student talk to live traffic is something that you cannot fake. And the number one thing, other than me being the flashlight wavy person, is they'll come up and tell me, isn't being a controller the most stressful job in the world? And the answer to that is sometimes. When you are a trainee, then yes. When you are not comfortable with what you are doing and you realize that you are responsible on an average day for 5,000 lives and tens of billions of dollars worth of aircraft every single day, that comes with some inherent stress. But once you get certified and you know what you're doing, then virtually all of that stress goes away. It's no different than driving a car. Once you know what you're doing, then it's actually entertaining. Every once in a while, something strange will happen, an emergency, weather system deviations, things like that. And it can get a little dicey every once in a while, but that's 5-10 days out of the year. 98% of the time, in my opinion, controllers get paid way too much money to sit there and talk. Now, that's not their opinion, but how we are able to understand who's in the sky, who's number one, who's number two, this is the biggest change in the past 40 to 50 years. The technology we have now allows us to have a very clear picture of where all aircraft are at one time. 50 years ago, this was not the case, and the job was far more difficult. But now, even when aircraft are on the ground at the Pittsburgh airport, controllers do not have to look out the window and physically look at the aircraft. They can look at a radar display that is up in the tower, and it looks like kind of like a video game. And you can see this aircraft here, who they are, where they're trying to get to. If you're working in a radar room, the radar display you look at will tell you almost exactly where everybody is, what they're doing, the speed they are, the altitude they're at, and you use this information to separate aircraft, put them in a line if you need to. But if I was really going to explain all the rules that I had to understand and follow, we would be here for a very long time. The amount of raw information that a controller needs to be able to take in, decipher, and instantly regurgitate on a daily basis is massive. A lot of students come through the program that have issues with memorizing raw information. And early on, I tell them they need to find something else to do. This job is not for everyone. If you are the type of person who likes to analyze information from 500 different angles before you make a decision, like my wife when she goes shopping, then no. If you get anxiety and you think about bad things that could happen all the time, then this job is not for you. But it is an acquired skill. Nobody is born knowing how to do this type of stuff. If you have some natural talent when it comes to this type of information, and that is a very large part of it, natural talent, just your mind is wired correctly to do this type of stuff. And you work relatively hard. A couple years, you'll know what you're doing and get paid way too much money. Like I said, there's only 25 schools in the country. The closest one other than CCBC right here is Kent State. And Kent State is a 4-year degree, and a lot of other schools are 4-year degrees. CCBC is only a 2-year degree, and our program is very focused on giving only the information you need, nothing extra. We don't make you take a lot of extra gen eds and things like that. Our classes are specifically geared to exactly what you would need to do if you ever did get hired by the government. And if you do graduate from a school like ours, you get preference over other people when they have hiring bids. Now, like I said, this is not a very large field. There's only about 20,000 controllers. And the government plans on hiring about 1,000 a year for the next 5 years, and then they'll kind of reassess after that. 1,000 a year does not sound like a very large number. They cannot find people fast enough because nobody really knows or understands this career at all, and nobody really just kind of falls into this. Most of the students I get are the children of controllers. The only people who really know about this field are pilots and controllers. So like I said, most of the students I get are the kids of either a pilot or a controller. When it comes to the real-world application of ATC, this is a very large system, and everybody involved is a team, and we work together. Controllers work together with pilots, and our system is about as efficient as you can get. If you were to compare the ATC system to Canada or Europe, we are more than twice as efficient as far as operation costs per hour. And the traffic we have, especially on the East Coast, just the sheer volume of aircraft in a very small space is just mind-boggling. Right now, within a 50-mile circle of New York City, there are probably 1,200 aircraft in the air. And if you work in that area, then yes, your life is probably a little stressful. Controller pay is actually based on the facility you work at with how busy it is. So if you work at Youngstown, you are not going to make as much money as somebody who works at a high-end facility like Cleveland Center or LaGuardia or Baltimore, Atlanta. So level 5 is really the lowest level, and level 12 is the highest. So average level 5 controller would probably make about $90,000 to $100,000 a year. And then level 12, I know level 12 controllers that make over $300,000 a year. But everything is based on kind of your base pay. Controllers get paid extra for everything. So my brother works at Washington Center, and last year he made about $235,000 with no overtime. But his base pay was only about $150,000. He gets paid extra for working at night. He gets paid extra for working on Sundays. He gets paid extra when he trains other people. He gets paid extra basically as soon as he walks in the door. The number one reason that people get into this job is because of the money. And I don't have a huge problem with that. Money makes life a lot easier when you're 24 years old and you can buy whatever you want. But they stick around because it is a highly entertaining job. And in my opinion, the best thing about the job is I don't really have a boss. Really, I show up, I work the aircraft, I make sure nothing bad happens, and then I go home. Nobody is breathing over my shoulder at any time to do my job. I am motivated enough, all right, to do my own job. I don't need somebody breathing down my neck. And I never check email. I don't have to sit in on meetings and things like that. I show up, I work the planes, and then I go home. Probably my second favorite thing about the job is actually how little I actually have to work. And an average 8-hour day, I'm on position talking to aircraft, doing my job for about 3.5 hours in an 8-hour day. Controllers do have to be able to maintain a very high level of focus. And you can only maintain this high level of focus for a relatively short amount of time. If I'm going to stare at a radar display or stare out the window, work an aircraft, I can only do this for 45 minutes to an hour at a time. If you were forced to work aircraft for 3 hours straight, your mind would be mush after that. So normal shift, especially for en route controllers, would be work 45 minutes, take an hour break. Work 45 minutes, take an hour break. And you get paid the entire time. And the facilities you work at, especially en route facilities, these are government buildings. They are very nice, and they have pools, they have gyms, they have media rooms. So after 45 minutes of working, I can go to the cafeteria, get a sandwich, and then work out for a half hour. And then I go back to work an aircraft. Work another 45 minutes, and then take a half-hour nap. Some other downsides of the job. There are certain medical requirements to be a controller. If you have issues with vision, hearing, vascular issues, you will be disqualified. Because it deals with public safety, thousands of lives, a lot of money, they do put very strict regulations on who can be a controller health-wise and who can't. So it is very common for somebody to start their career, be in a car accident or something like that, and then lose their medical. So you can kind of go from having a wonderful career to all of a sudden you don't have a job at all. Now, you still would qualify for medical retirement and things like that, but it's just one of those things that you cannot control because of the strict medical requirements to do this job.
Does that apply for drugs as well?
Yes. As soon as you are employed, day one, in fact, our school, you are open to random drug testing at any point. Every student that comes through our program is drug tested at least once, and this covers a very wide range of drugs, not just illegal ones. Sudafed, can't take it. Anything that has allergy medication in it, you are not allowed to take. Can't take Dayquil, can't take NyQuil. There's a lot of medications that alter your mind where you cannot focus. So if you have taken any of these types of medications, then you are not allowed to be on position for a predetermined amount of time. So just not the normal drugs even. And the biggest one is allergy medicine. A lot of controllers have issues with allergies and things like that, and they are not allowed to take that type of medication. Our program requires you to get some flying hours as a part of the degree. The thinking behind this is if you are going to be responsible for aircraft, pilots, you have to understand what the pilot is going through. So in our program, they need to complete 30 hours of flying. Again, the thinking behind this is if I'm going to boss him around all day, I need to understand what he's going through. A lot of other schools do not do this. And in my opinion, the flying requirement at CCBC is one of the things that gives us, or our graduates, an advantage over other graduates. Right now, the hiring process that the government uses is not the most efficient process. It's no different than most other government operations. It is not very well run. But if you do get hired as a controller, the very first step in your training and your career path would be to go to Oklahoma City. Every controller that gets hired by the FAA, their process starts in Oklahoma City. And the pass rate in Oklahoma City over the last 5 years is about 60%. So 6 out of every 10 that go to Oklahoma City pass. And this is actually higher than what it usually has been over the past 20 years. Usually it's hovered around 40 or 50%.
So how good is it for your school?
We haven't had anybody not get through Oklahoma City in the last 5 years. When it comes to the pass rate in Oklahoma City, they hire a wide variety of people. They hire our graduates, other schools' graduates, controllers in the military. They even hire people off the street. We cannot supply enough controllers for their needs, so they literally grab people off the street. But our program is tailor-made to Oklahoma City's. If you can get through me, and I am far more intense than Oklahoma City, by the time you get there, it is not going to be a problem. And this is exactly what I want. I want them to go out into the field and make us look good. The president of the Controllers Union actually called CCBC the Harvard of ATC. If they pass Oklahoma City, they will be sent to a facility. And just because you have passed Oklahoma City does not necessarily mean that you are going to get certified at whatever facility you go to. And let's say you get sent to New York TRACON. New York TRACON is highly regarded as the hardest facility to get certified at in the country. So about 40% of the people who get sent to New York TRACON get certified. The other 60% do not. Now, if you do not pass Oklahoma City, if you do not get certified at whatever facility you go to, you are fired, and you never get to try again. You get one chance at this. And if you don't pass, you're done. So I am very careful with who I let through the program and who I do not. Because you get one chance at this, because it is not for everybody, I want this young person to find out now if it's for them or not. Most other ATC schools, their graduation rate is between 80 and 90%. 80 and 90% of the people in that program graduate with that degree. CCBC's is under 50%, which is exactly what I want. This job is not for everybody, and I want them to find out very early on if it's for them. If it is, great. If it's not, find something else to do, because I don't want you wasting the next 5 years of your life just to get fired. Another thing that's very important to the graduates is in Oklahoma City, everything is a competition. You are not down there by yourself. You are in a class, usually with 20 people. And at the end, you will actually be ranked based on how you did. If you finished first in your class, you get to pick the facility you go to. If you finish last in your class, then you don't get to pick. And there's a very good chance you're going to Alaska, California, and you do not get a choice. If they tell you you're going to Alaska, then you either go or you get fired. So my goal for graduates is not to pass Oklahoma City. My goal for our graduates is to finish first. The facility you get sent to is going to be the #1 factor in whether you are happy with your life or not. If you're going to a place you want to live, then you're going to be happy. If you're going to a place that you despise, then you're probably not going to be happy. So my goal is them not to pass. My goal is for them to finish first. 1, they get to pick where they want to go, and 2, they make us look good. During COVID, there were 6 consecutive classes in Oklahoma City where a Beaver graduate finished first. And that's exactly what I want. Now, once they get to their facility, they're kind of on their own. But the #1 facility that people want that come through CCBC is Cleveland Center, because it's a relatively low cost of living area. It's a very good facility to work at. But like I said, most of our students are from out of state, and a lot of them want to go back to where they're originally from and things like that. But another one of the downsides is there is a limited number of facilities in the US, so you may not have direct control over where you get sent. You may have to move somewhere you don't want to work. General skills that a controller will need. For the most part, communication is the #1. Do you speak well? Do you talk clearly? Are you able to follow basic instructions? Are you able to think quickly, make a decision? Math used to be a very large part of it. But with technology and things like that, math has mainly been taken out of it. There's still a lot of geometry involved and things like that. But all of these skills you can get while you are training. 95% of the students that walk through the door have no individual math skills whatsoever. But over 6 months to a year, I can give them the skills that they need to be successful in this job. For the most part, you just need to be able to work hard. This is a lot of raw information, and a lot of people don't want to put the time and effort into it. They just want to show up to class, pay attention while they're in class, and then go home and do whatever they want. That's not how this stuff works. If this is really what you want to do, if you want to make $100 an hour by the time you're 23, then you're going to have to work. So while you are a trainee, both at the school, Oklahoma City, whatever facility you go to, your life is not going to be very pleasant. All you do is study, and you're kind of the new person, so a lot of the older veterans give them a hard time, and that's the way it's always been, and I don't see it really changing anytime soon. But once you get certified, all of that stops. Once you get certified, you know what you're doing, everybody leaves you alone, and you're happy as can be. The problem is 3 or 4 years of training. A lot of people just can't get through it. They get tired of the grind, they get tired of the work, and they just can't put in enough effort for that long of a time. But once you get certified, you really just get paid to talk, and it's not that difficult for the most part. I'm not sure if you can see this, but this is this is the software that we use at CCBC for the en route radar portion. And in the real world, this is kind of what an en route radar display would look like. The airspace that we use is the exact same airspace that Oklahoma City uses for training, and it is this upside down funnel. And you own from the surface to flight level 230. You have an approach control here, kind of like Pittsburgh. They own a little bit of airspace. This is Monroe, Louisiana. And each one of these slashes, here, 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 is an aircraft. And associated with each aircraft is what's called a data block, and it has certain information on it. The aircraft's call sign, the altitude, what's called the CID, the ground speed, and their destination. And you can find other information. You have the altimeter setting, use beacon codes. But this is what a controller would stare at all day, every day, for the most part. Obviously, it would not be that big, but radar displays are usually somewhere between 29 inches by 29 inches. The new ones in route-wise are 40 inches. They're actually a little bit larger. And they'd wear a headset, and they'd broadcast over a frequency that all of these aircraft in your airspace would be on. And when they transition to somebody else's airspace, you would switch their frequency, and they would start talking to a different controller. So if you took off from Pittsburgh and flew to Orlando, the first controller you would really be talking to is the ground controller at Pittsburgh while you're taxiing to the runway. And once you got to the runway, the pilot would start talking to the local controller. And the local controller would clear the pilot for takeoff. But once the aircraft got in the air, the local controller would switch the pilot over to the radar departure controller. And the radar departure controller would talk to the pilot for a little while, and then they would get handed off to Cleveland Center. And then they would get handed off to Washington Center, Memphis Center, Atlanta Center. So there's probably between here and Florida 15 to 18 controllers that get involved. And at every point, all right, somebody has eyes on where that aircraft is, what they're doing, make sure they're not getting close to anybody else. And this is something that happens every commercial flight that you are on. If you are on a commercial flight, all right, somebody has an eye on you at all times. Has anybody ever been held while they were in the air? Nah. How did you feel about that?
Not too good.
Yeah, not too good. Now, I can assure you, it is not my fault. All right? Yeah. We're moving as fast as we can. But every once in a while, things kind of pop up that we cannot control. The number one thing that we cannot control is weather. And it doesn't matter how hard I try, I am not getting him to go near a thunderstorm. He ain't doing it. And I can only fit so many planes onto one runway. right, now, has anybody been delayed coming into Pittsburgh? Probably was not recently. This was probably 15, 20 years ago. A lot more planes coming into Pittsburgh back then. Physics does not allow us to put as many planes as we want on a runway whenever we want. What was the last aircraft you flew commercially?
What's that?
What was the last aircraft you flew?
Airbus 330.
All right, so you take that Airbus 330. How would you feel if I put you a mile and a half behind a 767?
The 330 would be, because they're about the same.
I know.
There, but yeah. Mile and a half's not much.
No, mile and a half is not a lot of room.
Feel better with 5 miles.
Yes, you would. With the physics of aircraft, I cannot put a smaller aircraft right behind a larger aircraft without something very bad happening. Yeah. So, like I said, we're moving them as fast as we can. If we can move them faster, we would. So delays usually are weather related, but every once in a while, there's just too many planes to fit in one spot. And we're doing the best we can, but every once in a while, sorry, you're gonna have to sit here for a little while.
Do you have less turbulence with prop jobs coming in and having the distance behind?
Not near to the extent. But we have to follow very, very specific rules when it comes to two aircraft on approach behind each other based on their size, their weight category and things like that. So sometimes the spacing requirement we will have between two aircraft is 2.5 miles. Sometimes the spacing requirement we will have between two different types of aircraft will be 6 miles. And we cannot deviate from these mileages. If we try to go shorter, somebody's going to get bounced around and something bad's going to happen. If we use any more, then we are wasting time, we're wasting money. So this exact same situation, two aircraft coming into Pittsburgh, landing on the same runway, one time we might need 3 miles, another time we might need 6 miles, depending on the type of aircraft that are coming in.
Does the FAA have anything to say about how airlines construct their schedules to minimize that problem?
The FAA coordinates with airlines. And about 10 or 15 years ago, they really got together and said, okay, we can't have all of these flights go to New York and all end up there at the same time.
So how do they monitor that?
Not very well. They're doing the best they can. But there's a lot of unknown variables in this field that just throw a wrench into it real fast. On paper, it might look great. And then all of a sudden, a storm system comes up between Charlotte and the Northeast, and now all of a sudden, you just threw a very big wrench into the entire thing.
There has to be some monitoring.
There is. But when you're dealing with aircraft that go 500 miles an hour, it's not something that you can adjust to very quickly. So they're trying. And they have gotten better. But the main reason they have gotten better, and delays are down over the past 15, 20 years. The main reason delays are down is because traffic is down. Traffic is down passenger-wise, number of commercial aircraft after 9/11.
Is that all part of the current upgrade for the ATC system?
The communication between us,
Monitoring of what is actually happening. Is that part of the goal?
yes. Now, they are spending an awful lot of money.
It's a very complicated problem.
It is a very complicated problem. And most of the things they are trying, in theory, are a good idea, but in practical application, they do not end up going very well. So I'd say 80% of them are getting scrapped within a couple months of us trying them. But like I said, traffic's down since 9/11. We're still clawing our way back. We're almost there, but the upgrade to the system's called Next Gen, and it's been kind of in the works for the past 20 years. It started when I got into the field, and they're still not done. But it is a government process, so nothing happens fast. But even with all of its downfalls, this is still a very efficient system in comparison to other countries.
Are you tracking satellite tracking? Is that coming into play with your group, or are you still just not too sure?
When it comes to the radar displays and the information that we are looking at, the backbone of the system is still ground-based. It is not satellite-based. Now, the new system is trying to bring in satellite-based equipment, but the problem is this system cannot be faulty. It has to be accurate at all times. And if we were to switch over to satellite-based, every once in a while, it would go fuzzy, just like your cable goes fuzzy. Interference, weather, things like that. So the backbone of it is still ground-based. And the biggest problem with that is expensive to maintain. Most of the hardware that we use, the radar sites and things like that, they're 40, 50 years old.
I'm going to say, you're still using World War II, right?
For the most part, yes. The technology that we currently use is World War II technology. Now, we've got some fancy bells and whistles that come along with it, but primarily the system is just the same radar they used in World War II. Some fancy extra boxes have been added. Yes?
In this age of unruly passengers or medical emergencies, and the pilot, I guess he's the one that makes the decisions, and he lets it on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Could you lead us through the decision process of where he goes and clearing the way for him?
When it comes to day-to-day operations, all right, nothing strange is happening. He knows where he wants to go, I know where he wants to go, and I get him there as quick as I can, and we are on the same page 99.9% of the time. But when something strange happens, it is his call on what he wants to do. If he decides, I want to get on the ground as quickly as possible, then I point him at the nearest airport. If he wants to go to a specific airport for whatever reason, all he has to do is say, I want on the ground now. And I will get everybody out of the way, and I'll get him on the ground now. So the controller-pilot relationship is kind of like me and my wife.
That bad.
99% of the time.
I swear at him and he swears at me.
Yeah, that's right. 99% of the time, all right, I get what I want. So that's my wife. But that 1% of the time, if he wants to do something, I can hear it. And I'm going to give him whatever he wants. So if, whatever it is, passenger or something like that, all he has to do is tell me, I need this now. And I'll do whatever I need to do to make that happen.
Is it the pilot's sole decision to land that plane now?
Yes. I cannot influence what he wants. No, I am not invested in the decision-making process. My goal is to give the pilot what they need. All right? It is not my job to make the actual decision in a situation like that. Now, if he asks for my opinion, then I will give it. If the pilot asks me, I want to get on the ground now, which one's closer, this one or this one? Then I will tell him, this one's closer, go here. But if they've already got their mind made up, I just make it happen. Anybody else?
I have a problem with flying.
I do too.
Yeah, because my son's a captain, or he's a pilot for Southwest Airlines. And since he's been coming up in the pilot now, he started when he was 18, now he's 50. And my problem is communications. Because when I try to communicate to him, he talks to me in acronyms and short sentences. And I cannot understand what the heck's he talking about. Nor can he understand when I'm talking and trying to give him too much detail. Give it to him short.
That's right. Pilots and controllers speak in acronyms. It's very common knowledge that controllers only really communicate 3 ways. 1, swearing. 2, is sarcasm. And the last one is acronyms. You should hear me order food at a drive-thru. But that is just a part of the job. The phraseology I use at work, because I say these types of things all day, they do influence the other portions of my life. Patience. Controllers have no patience whatsoever. They want stuff done now. Because if you don't do something now, that is ruining my picture for the next 10 airplanes. So this does drag over to your personal life. I'm just fortunate that my wife has no patience either, and we get along great.
You ever have a thing with a flip come off the screen, which means he's either lost them or?
Me personally?
Yeah.
No. Now, as far as losing somebody on your radar display, there are several ways that this could happen. But me personally, I have never had to talk to a pilot where something bad just happened. Now, I do know people that have.
Did it
And
affect them to a degree, or?
for the most part, no. Control.
Break and then it first shut off?
Oh, if that happens, then they are getting pulled off position. The government's going to drug test them. They're going to have to talk to a therapist. They're going to have to take a week off of work. So there are guidelines in place for these types of things. But controllers are very cynical. They deal with so much life, just such big issues, that they almost devalue human life. If you really thought about all the people on board while you were working, you'd have a stroke. So because of this, I do know somebody who just has been really unlucky. And in the first 10 years of their career, they have talked to 3 aircraft that have crashed. And they had done nothing wrong. They just got unlucky, aircraft malfunction, and controllers have nicknamed this guy Killer. That's what everybody calls him. And he just takes it in stride. He doesn't really faze him at all. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit about how the various parts of the system communicate with each other rather than with the pilots?
When it comes to the system in general, everything is still hardwired. The information is not transferred over the internet. This would lead to massive security issues and things like that. So everything is still hardwired. So this sector and this sector here are literally running off of different radar sites, but they are still tied together at that facility. Now, facility to facility, sometimes they are hundreds and hundreds of miles apart. Everything's still hardwired.
And the controllers talk to each other?
Yeah. When it comes to an average area, this is just one sector, but each area at an en route facility has somewhere between 5 and 8 sectors. So there will be 5 and 8 controllers in a room, probably a quarter the size of this. And there will be separate radar displays at each position. And if you need something, you can either call them kind of through a shout line, or you can physically just walk over there and start talking to them. Terminal controllers are much closer to each other, so physically calling them is something that doesn't happen that often. They just kind of lean over because they work 5 feet away from them. But being able to maintain focus when there's a lot of stuff going on around you, because all controllers do is just talk and talk and talk. You got to be able to block everything else out and focus solely on what you are doing. But yeah, a lot of times when you need to communicate with another controller, you can just either wheel over in the chair and talk to them, or you can kind of call them through a shout line. Yes?
Do all small private planes have radios to be in contact with air traffic control?
In theory, no. Now, certain times, aircraft do have to be in contact with controllers. But there's a lot of times that they don't. When I got my private pilot's license, taking off from the Beaver County Airport, the Beaver County Airport's tower is not always open. And when it's not open, it doesn't mean that you can't take off or land or anything like that. So most aircraft, yes, do have communication systems to talk to ATC, but under a lot of situations, they do not need to. Now, if you want to take off from Atlanta, then yes. But if you want to take off out of Zelienople, then no, you don't need to. Usually at smaller airports like that, they will have a frequency that anybody that is operating in and out of that airport, the pilots will talk to each other. They will say, okay, I'm going to land first, you come in behind me, and things like that. But once you get to an airport that is busy enough, then you kind of got to have ATC service there to make sure nobody thinks or jumps ahead of the line or anything like that.
Is that kind of a pilot a problem for, say, Greater Pitt Airport?
No, not particularly. Pittsburgh is set up in a very organized manner for ATC. Not all airports are designed from an ATC perspective as well as Pittsburgh. O'Hare is probably one of the most difficult airports to work at as a controller because there are runways to the north and the south of the tower, and one person cannot be responsible for everybody on the grounds. So the more people that get involved, the harder life kind of is. But most airports, this is not a problem at all.
Pardon me for interjecting, but just to give a little bit more perspective on your question, there are many forms of airspace above us right here. Most of the controllers control down to about 1,200 feet above the surface until you get to terminal areas like an airport with a tower, Beaver County Airport if the tower's open, Pittsburgh International, Chicago, O'Hare, JFK, and New York, et cetera, et cetera. So like James said about Zelienople, there's no tower there. There's no instrument approach there in certain weather conditions. They don't have to talk to anybody, other than it's a good idea to announce that you're taking the runway or landing at the runway. But it depends on what airspace you're in, who you have to talk to, and on what frequency you have to talk to them. So, and I think your question was about talking to different controllers. There is a handoff procedure. You want to just lightly go over that? Like going from Cleveland Center to Washington Center, what would you do?
Yeah, anytime an aircraft is transitioning from one point to another, one controller cannot be responsible for the entire course of that flight. So whenever an aircraft is leaving your airspace and transitioning to somebody else's airspace, you can do what's called an automated handoff. The computer system understands the flight path. So this sector that we use is sector 66. So an aircraft transitioning from west to east, all right, 66 would type in something in the computer system to hand them off to sector 65. And as soon as I hand them off to 65, they would show up on their radar display. And they would accept the handoff, and I would get a message And as soon as they accepted the handoff, I would switch the pilot's frequency over to whatever frequency was for 65. And they would talk to them for a little while. And as soon as they would transition out of their airspace, 65 would hand them off to whatever sector is next. And it would be 42 at Atlanta Center. So virtually all of this is through the computer system and is done with a very basic keyboard entry.
Great. James, thank you very much. I think we're out of time here.
No problem.
Appreciate it. I hope you all found that very